You are listening to Art Freaks. My name's Daniel Crossan. I'm an artist based in London. I'll be sitting down with a variety of creative people to find out why they make the things they make and what lessons they've learned along the way that will help you impact the world with your creativity. Today we meet artist Guy J. Oliver. Based in Margate, Guy is best known for his video art, but explores various disciplines including painting, collage, and performance art. In 2020, Guy was commissioned for the Jerwood FMV Awards to produce his major film, You Know Nothing of My Work, a multi-chapter musical exploring the dilemma of how we treat the art of disgraced, influential cultural icons. In 2021, Guy was nominated for the Jarman Award, which recognises and supports innovative artist filmmakers. Guy's video work is funny, yet at times uncomfortable. It is dark, but also commendably vulnerable. Guy's art explores death, our shared cultural experiences, and the ludicrousness of some aspects of our lives. In this episode, we talk about the thinking behind the video work and how his increasingly vulnerable and personal films are conceived. We also discuss Quench, a non-profit gallery and project space situated in Margate, run by Guy and his partner, Artist Lindsey Mendick. This podcast was recorded just before the launch of Guy's latest show that took place last month at Quench, and the film that we discussed, titled Badly Drawn Boys, can currently be watched in full on the Quench Gallery website. This is Guy J. Oliver. You're a Londoner.
Sort of. You kind of know that end of town. It's like right in the far suburbs of North London.
Very end of the Northern Line.
Yeah. So it's more small town than metropolitan life, you know.
What was school like? Did you go to an all-boys school?
I did.
Yeah, me too. Do you regret that?
I don't regret it. I just didn't enjoy it very much.
Why?
It was just quite an oppressive kind of vibe there. It kind of had allusions to being, you know, a top sort of Eton style. It was a state school. I guess you'd call it a grammar school, like a selective state school. I was never very happy there. I later found out I have dyslexia, possibly ADHD. I know everyone has ADHD now, but so I was always very slow. I was very bright, but I was kind of a bit slow at reading and writing. So everyone thought I was lazy, and yeah, it was just a bit of a struggle, I suppose. And I was always a bit more creatively minded. A bit of a daydreamer.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, which I guess, you know, all makes sense.
The word I've heard you use about yourself is nerdy, because I think you get into things and then follow them sort of and think about them a lot. And I think a lot of sort of schooling is a sort of repeating process where you're sort of tested on how much you can remember. That really is very difficult for people that cannot concentrate on things that they're not very interested in. So you also had a sort of major surgery on your spine. Was that in high school or in primary school?
High school. So it kind of dominated my teens, I suppose. My brother had the same condition called scoliosis, and it was with me. It was discovered when I was about 12, 13. So for most of my time at secondary school, I had to wear like a body brace, which was like a plastic corset thing that was supposed to kind of correct. So as you grow as an adolescent, if you have that form of the condition, it just kind of goes a bit off course as you're sort of having your growth spurt. So I had to wear this thing all the time. I had to sleep in it, to wear it kind of all day pretty much, to kind of hold me in place so it didn't kind of deviate. I had my 18th birthday in hospital, but yeah, it kind of dominated my time at secondary school. So it's probably another reason why it was a bit miserable. I'm kind of looking back at that time now as the subject of a film project that I'm making, because it sort of dominated our family's life. And it wasn't just that, there was a kind of weird run of like conditions or hospital related issues for me and my two other brothers that seemed to be the story of our life for our adolescence. It's called Badly Drawn Boys, and I'm kind of right deep in the middle of making it, I'm editing at the moment. And I interviewed most of my family members, kind of about the memories of that time. Yeah, just about how something like that becomes like a defining story within a family. But I suppose also it was key to maybe a kind of formative experience for being a creative person. So I documented it when I was in hospital, and I kind of made some work about it sort of soon after. So yeah, it has this significance, and it's interesting then to look back at it as this formative art experience.
Do you think that I'm assuming the difficulty in participating with all of the other boys at school encouraged that depth of thought for things because you were on the outskirts of things, so you were very much observing? Or do you think that's just generally in your nature as a person?
It's a good question. A bit of both, probably. I was never very sporty or kind of active. I was always obsessed with films and TV for as long as I remember, and music. But yeah, particularly during my teens, I became very, very obsessive about cinema in particular. I used to collect sort of movie magazines. I used to sort of like curate VHS tapes. I would try and sort of record a whole tape of like Coen Brothers films recorded off the TV or something, or like Steve Martin films, or I'd be a lot of my life revolved around doing things like that, scouring the TV guide, see what movies were on.
And like cataloguing, in a way, like cataloguing things in a kind of making a library of things, I would imagine, to better understand them as well.
What you'd call archiving.
That's the word I was, it just escaped me.
Yeah. I suppose I'm a bit of a sort of collector, hoarder, have tendencies like that.
I can't relate at all.
Sure.
Yeah. A lot of your films are kind of going into depth about something that's like what other people might find are fleeting thoughts. For example, in the year Everyone Died, which is a film that you talk about celebrities that are all dying in 2016, you kind of catalogue it and you present it in a very kind of, so we started this year and it was a pretty bad start to the year, and then it got worse and all of these people died. For anyone obviously that hasn't seen it, it's set to a song that you've written and you're performing yourself, and is talking about something very significant for everybody, obviously, and then also very significant in art, and then very significant in this subject matter of 2016. And you present it in quite a funny way. And then plugged in there, you also have very personal accounts of loss. What was it that drew you in initially to 2016? Was it the kind of quite obvious mass hysteria around someone like David Bowie, or was it just this consistent thing in the news cycle where you're like, this is getting a bit strange?
I think a lot of people did notice it in real time, but I remembered it straight away that it was pretty much the first week of January, David Bowie died. But then Alan Rickman died a few days later, and it felt like, whoa, what's going on? And I guess it then it just didn't stop. And then it was like, oh my God. And it kept going. I remember right through to Christmas, the other end of the year. Each day there was somebody, including like George Michael on Christmas Day, which seemed, weird in so many ways. And and like something you said before, I quite like the fact that you can kind of instantly engage with it. If you watch it, I can basically have a conversation with somebody about it, because it's something that most people would have had a thought about, or there's definitely going to be somebody in there that you have an opinion about, or that you remember, or it particularly affected you or something like that. But yeah, this idea of creating this sprawling spoken word song poem thing that follows an odd logic of basically archiving, cataloguing pretty much everyone who was mildly famous who died that year. And it's done, goes through the year. But it was also memorable for me because people I knew died and family members died. So it kind of, I do that a lot with my work, finding finding things in popular culture that punctuate my own life. Like, for example, in the film I'm making at the moment about my family. So my brother was in hospital. He'd been hit by a car in 1997, and it was the week that Princess Diana died. So it's like always this sort of association with him being in Edgware Hospital, and it was, that Sunday morning when Diana died. So it's these things follow your life, and they're one way or another, the news cycle or things that happen, whether we like it or not, kind of say a story of our life or of the time that we live in. And I get obsessed with that. I get obsessed with, this overriding obsession with time, essentially, and death, and how culture sort of gets formed over time. Especially because as I'm getting older, you kind of become very aware of the time that passes, and how if you look back now to a time from your youth, how everything looks different on the TV, and you suddenly become, in a way, you're not aware of it in real time.
Mm-hmm.
Once enough time passes, the past takes shape. It sort of changes somehow, or it solidifies into, there's an aesthetic that emerges that you realize is different to contemporary aesthetic.
And everyone says it's better. It was better then when, when we had whatever it's called, chromatic, whatever, on VHS. It's a better look.
Yeah.
It's like, it's just,
it's
kind of not better.
It was a better aspect ratio.
It might be better than, the phone aspect, which is incredibly difficult to make cinematic film for. I'm very interested in I go through stages of being interested in synchronicity and like strange things that happen. I'm wondering if you have any sort of beliefs or sort of what those kind of beliefs might be about that weirdness of things happening at the same time, or pointing at links between things. Do you ever sort of think, oh, there's something bigger at play, or you just think life is this kind of comedy of coincidences and chaos?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think partly why I was drawn to the idea of making a film about it, because it is just a random collection of things that happen, but as if it's like a sort of scientific kind of examination that means something. Like, it's absurd, really. Like, it's all arbitrary just to define a year. I know it's not, because it's related to the rotation of the Earth and things like that. But we do use like a year as a measure of something important in terms of how we kind of define culture and things like that.
And the end of the year with the fireworks, and they say like, oh, well, let's look back at the year, and now it's completely going to be changed. Everything's going to be different now. And then you wake up the next day slightly hungover, and you're like, yeah, it's the same. But they present it in this way, the media has this great way of like, let's celebrate and look forward to this brand new start that we've got. Let's really make use of it. And then, something really bad happens on the 2nd of January.
Yeah, exactly. And it's always so cruel that we're all hungover on that first day of the year as well. So it's never going to feel really fresh and exciting. Yeah, that time kind of just rolls on. It's a sort of relentless thing, but this idea of trying to scientifically examine it somehow. But also we always think that oh shit, time has passed, and we could have, maybe if I'd done something differently, I could have slowed it down or something. I did something wrong that's made so much time pass.
Sliding doors.
But also the idea that, because passing of time is so disturbing.
Especially the older you get.
Yeah. You imagine there must be a way of breaking that, of hacking that passage.
Have you seen that guy who like, he's obsessed, he's like a Silicon Valley guy, and he's obsessed with like living for as long as possible, and he takes like something like 120 tablets in the morning, and he sleeps like the optimum amount of time and exercises the optimum amount of time, and he's like reversed his biometric body clock to like the age of somebody who's 18 and he's in his 30s, but he looks really strange. Have you seen this guy?
I haven't, but I know there's a whole kind of there's a whole group of people who are into calorie restriction theory. That, you know, scientists have worked out that if you starve mice to the right measurements, you can kind of like triple their lifespan. So there's loads of people who have been doing this for a number of years, and they might well live to like 100 and something, but life is so miserable because you're hungry all the time and you don't have enough energy to be very functional or active. So it's just a very odd concept of extending your life, but extracting all the fun out of it.
Yeah. And sort of prolonging this inevitable thing that's inevitable, you know, like by making it further away, it doesn't stop it from happening. I sometimes feel like the people that are trying to prolong it as long as possible are like crossing their fingers and hoping that technology will save them from this inevitable thing.
Yeah.
But, you know, who wants to be Krang from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? It's, you know, running around as this
me.
Yeah, that guy. Yeah, another one of your films, Songs of Eternal Praise. You don't really talk too much about your relationship to religion, but there's sort of hints of it being a little bit funny, like as an adult looking back at some of the kind of, I don't know whether I'm sort of jumping and maybe thinking, because I was brought up Roman Catholic, and I look back at that time and I was like, I don't know, how does that affect me as a child, sort of learning about Jesus and this really horrific thing that happened, and like the cruelty of people and these very graphic, kind of slightly horrifying images that I could have sort of repeated. What's that kind of relationship with you? I know that you were at Songs of Praise as a kid. Was that something that was like part of your family life? Is that something you talk about in your film?
Yeah, and I think it's a pretty good observation, because it I did use this there's like references to a pilgrimage in the film, which is this thing that I actually did always used to do right up until in recent years. So I'm basically, I was brought up Church of England, Anglican. My mum's kind of quite religious, so we kind of brought up in that environment. I now sort of jokingly refer to myself as an Anglican atheist, because I definitely sort of don't believe in religion and God, but culturally that's sort of where I come from. So the film is sort of has all these references to death and resurrections, and this odd sort of disjunction between life and death, and confusion between life and death, and comedy and tragedy as well. So yeah, that was an important element to it. My own kind of religious background, because I use this actual bit of footage from an episode of Songs of Praise where me and my family are in the background of it, and we still had this video recording of it, of the BBC broadcast. And I guess, you know, kind of what we were just talking about kind of cheating death and time and things like that. And I suppose that film was very much about how it was about the relationship to moving image and this disjunction between death, life and death. Because I use various examples in film and TV where there's been some confusion about when people act being killed or nearly dying and actually nearly dying. And so I use there's like Michael J. Fox on set of Back to the Future 3. They were simulating him being hanged, and he but actually the stunt went wrong, and he nearly died. And I talk about the example of Brandon Lee being killed on set of The Crow, and you know, weirdly the echoes before the whole Alec Baldwin incident. But yeah, this idea that they finished the film of The Crow after he died, and so they had to kind of weirdly he's playing somebody who gets killed in the movie, comes back to life to avenge himself, and then that's what kind of happened in real life. But when he was shot on set, he was supposed to die, so he just collapsed to the ground, and no one realized he was actually shot. So all these kind of confusions and kind of meta religious, suppose references or metaphors, they all get mixed into the bag.
Do you find that your films are a way of you deeper understanding your thoughts on something, or do you sort of have your thoughts and you try to take the viewer on that journey when you're planning your film?
I think the process of making it does force me to kind of think more deeply and to kind of unify thoughts. I suppose there's some process of making threads between things, creating kind of systems about understanding. I'm a big fan of Adam Curtis, for example. I suppose he does a similar thing in a sort of like geopolitical way. I suppose we were talking about kind of small observations and using single examples of things that tell a story of something else, like a bigger story, a micro story telling a macro story. And Adam Curtis loves that. He'll say, meanwhile, in, the Sahara Desert, a young boy picked up a stone from the river and then 9/11 happened. Like he would create a direct link between something very small, changing the world. So I suppose in a way it's systems of thought. The process of making links between things, it is a way of kind of understanding the world.
Your work there's a lot of sort of theatrical aspects to it, whether that's sort of through the use of costume or the way that you're sort of presenting an idea is in a very sort of performative way. You're sort of almost you're a lot of the time playing a character who's sort of yourself, but it's like a version of yourself, which is easier for maybe the viewers who don't know you to understand.
It's a thing that I've thought a lot about. It's about like sincerity and irony, because I suppose I do have a style that is a bit deadpan, and so we were talking about kind of wrong footing the viewer and kind of and as you just said about like the characters, but they're all me, and this idea of it's not so much alter ego but like a performed self. Like I kind of see it as a sincere way of being myself, but it's always slightly, it comes across quite ironic and jokey, but I kind of want to be sincere at the same time. And I'm kind of interested in that, the idea of like artifice, things that can be very artificial can be quite sincere and authentic at the same time. So I think I'm often playing around with those ideas and how you can. I kind of did a talk about this idea, and I sort of like presented other films that kind of deal with sincerity and irony. And I used the example, there was an essay written about Wes Anderson's films, that this kind of highly produced artificial world that's, immediately recognizable as Wes Anderson's, aestheticized, construction, but it doesn't mean it's not real. The idea of, theatre being, that can be very phony, can be very, or when you're being very ironic, it's a sort of, it's a little card trick, isn't it? Being super ironic and super sincere at the same time.
It's British, quite British as well, of like, let's talk about some serious things, but also
don't appear like being serious.
Don't appear like you're being serious. And if you're being like throw some sarcasm in there, keep people guessing, and then they go, oh, you kind of did mean. And Americans don't tend, I'm friends with a lot of Americans, and whenever I meet new Americans, it takes them a while to get used to me, because I'm kind of saying something but kind of like being sarcastic, or it just doesn't cut through. Often I think it appears abrasive. And when you spend time with Americans, I spent time with some actors at this festival, and we stayed in this house together. So we're in sort of very close proximity. And there was like this point at the end, and I found it so funny. At the end of the festival, we like sat around in a circle, and then they asked everybody to go and say what was a really important thing that you took from the festival. And I just found the whole experience really difficult. And I was thinking afterwards, why did I find that so difficult? And it's like, well, you don't really do that in England. You don't really sort of sit around and talk about your feelings. You just sort of talk about it in another way.
Yeah, I think it's a really significant point. You know, we're a bit emotionally screwed up, and we're a very indirect nation, you know, in terms of the way we've learned to communicate. You know, we understand it between ourselves, but yeah, it must be very confusing. Where, yeah, Americans are direct and they will say what they mean, and we've created quite a coded form of communication, which is fascinating. But yeah, I think I'm definitely a product of being British in that sense.
You talk about it a lot in your films. You use a lot of things that maybe wouldn't resonate with American audiences. They might not understand the references, or at least just not know the characters involved, you know?
Yeah. But then I feel like I'm very much a product of sort of 50 British and American references.
American culture was a massive part of childhood in the UK in the 90s.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned wrestling, and that was huge for me, WWF wrestling. And then I took that into my film work. I sort of created like a sort of Ultimate Warrior alter ego for a while. And again, yeah, it comes back to a kind of theatricality and a kind of confusion between what's real and what's not, because I guess wrestling is such an interesting example of that it's this art form that isn't quite like anything else. It's sport, it's theatre, it's Hollywood. It's fake, but it's kind of not entirely fake.
Yeah, they're pretending to get beaten up and then they really are hurting themselves. And then, as you spoke about in your interview on Talk Art, you were saying about how there's a lot of tragic ends to wrestlers' lives because they're sort of dealing with pain with strong painkillers and opiates and stuff. So you have all of these like untimely deaths of these heroes that are kind of presented in such an over-the-top way, but there's not like one wrestler that's not. So it's this kind of thing that you just plug into, and it's this alternate universe where, you know, normal people just look so pathetic next to them. I remember I met around the time when, so like past the period of Ultimate Warrior, sort of the Attitude era, I got back into wrestling. I couldn't watch wrestling when I was really young because I didn't have Sky. So I think that's one of the reasons I've collected the Hasbros, is because I never got those toys because I never really related or watched wrestling. But I always thought the toys were cool when people brought them into school. And then the Attitude era, I got Sky and I was kind of watching it and got really into it. And I went and met The Rock and the Big Show. And I just remember seeing the Big Show and just thinking like, I am inferior. I'm very, very small person. They come from sports worlds, like their dads are wrestlers, or they like The Rock. He's kind of used that almost just as a stepping stone to becoming one of the most famous people in the entire world. And then, you know, I've heard the word president in the same sentence as him, President Dwayne Rock Johnson. So, I mean, if that's just being mentioned, it sort of tells you how he's regarded by a lot of people.
Well, there's always been a weird connection between politics and or American politics and wrestling. To say nothing of the fact that the first time I ever heard of Donald Trump was because of his relationship to WWF wrestling. I think one of the WrestleManias was held at Trump Towers or something like that, and he would often be around as like, who's this, you know, weird business guy. And I think that there's a lot of the kind of showmanship and theatricality in American politics seems to come directly from wrestling. You know, it's bonkers. And I always think I think it was John Cena, the first public announcement of the death of Osama bin Laden was at a live wrestling match. And it's this very strange bit of footage you can see on YouTube or whatever. So the crowd are kind of, is this real or not? Again, you know, these confusions between reality and theatre. But yeah, very quickly then it becomes USA.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like, it's so American and it's so maximalist and so kind of hyped up. I think that kind of interest in using that as a subject in my work also sort of started like an interest in the concept of masculinity and constructions around ideas of masculinity. And then it sort of evolved into like football subcultures and things like that over a period of time. I suppose I'm doing it with this film project as well about, I'm one of three brothers, and the idea of adulthood and masculinity, and
where do you sit in this unit? Like not that's not a question, but like you're questioning yourself, like how have I become like this, and why is my brother like this, and then it's such a sort of complicated and long relationship with so much history and so much, I don't know, shared experience and shared joy, shared hurt.
My parents still live in the house we grew up in, and this sort of ideas around sort of connections to childhood and things not changing. I don't know, that tendency to want to keep things, like the old days, keeping my old Hasbro wrestling figures,
Are you a person that kind of holds on to things for a long time?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had to try and sort of break that a bit. But yeah, I'm definitely not someone who lets go of things easily.
I'm imagining you still have a lot of stuff in London, and also you've taken a lot of things to your new home in Margate, which I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the move and why did you ditch us?
I had to downscale a lot. Lindsay's doesn't sort of subscribe to that idea of keeping hold of old crap.
It's probably predictable in the reasons of why you wanted to move out of London. But yeah, was that a difficult move? Was that something that you were really sort of longing to sort of escape London, or?
It wasn't like a long-term ambition. I kind of never thought I would or could leave London somehow, because it's so, especially being an artist, it feels so connected to, the sort of cultural world and the art world. But yeah, as soon as I started to kind of see that actually that it is possible to function outside of London, and then Margate became a really interesting, attractive option. And we were aware that, quite a few people were doing that. Like artists were moving there, and it was within proximity to London. But yeah, it's been great, especially we moved kind of after the first lockdown. So
3 years, maybe? You've been there 3 years?
Coming up for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
We were desperate to get out of London at that point. But yeah, it's so unmanageable, doesn't need to be said, like, especially for artists, to be expected to, on top of everything, work as little as possible to do your art and rent a studio. Yeah, for almost all of us, it's impossible. It's an impossible sort of conundrum.
Yeah,
and it's so hard to do it. But yeah, that was a big factor.
Mm-hmm.
But no, it's been great, and there's a real kind of sense of community down here. We're not moving back anytime soon.
No, yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with London.
I mean, I'm hoping to move out soonish, and I'm on the I'm in Essex, so I'm like kind of outside of London, but it's still very easy to get there. But I find working from home that I don't do it so much, especially having kids. It's a lot revolved around spending time with them. And one thing that I'm sort of resistant to move out of London is that access to culture, the museums, just being able to, as that interest for my children, grows hopefully towards sort of culture, and even things that are just fun experiences, science museum. There's just so many things all the time to go and see. So I'm hoping that I'm still going to be in proximity to that. And you are you're running a gallery called Quench, with your partner Lindsey, and it was interesting to talk to you about that before, because I hadn't realized that it was you're not taking commission. The artists are getting basically the best deal of all time, where they get 100% commission and some help with setting up the show, and you step back a little bit in terms of the curation of it. What was the thinking behind that? Was that an ambition you had for a long time, and then how did that start, and how's that going?
It started kind of. It was a lockdown idea, a pandemic idea. It started as a just a small concept of we could use a part of some space that we might rent out as a studio. We could sort of separate a chunk of it and put on shows. But it also, because the pandemic was this kind of bleak time in the art world, and things were being cut, jobs were being lost, opportunities were going, galleries were closing down. So yeah, and I think certainly for Lindsey, like a motivating factor was just the amount of moaning there was. Like, people were very quick to call things out, to say this institution is wrong. Yeah, people saying what was wrong with things, but rather, well, perhaps we could try and do something that was a better model, or was just a more optimistic thing. We kind of, it was nice. It felt like a good news story. Just when we announced we were doing this, the reaction just to the concept of it was really positive, which really encouraged us. And then we kicked it off by doing a crowdfunder campaign, which went really well. So it was great. Yeah, there was a lot of goodwill, and yeah, thankfully it's kind of worked out. It grew because the initial space that we were going to move into fell through, which was going to be quite modest, and then we found this quite large space that was a gallery that was not being used in Margate, and we got it's a really good deal. We're paying, like, we couldn't dream of doing what we're doing here in London, and it's so sad. So many artist-run spaces have closed down now in London, or are struggling to kind of keep afloat. So yeah, we were able to do that here, which is great, and it's worked. Like, in the sense of we've been running for 2.5 years, 2 and a bit. Yeah, lost track of how many shows we've done, but it's it's been really amazing to work with so many artists. They're mostly emerging, younger artists, or artists that we admire, artists that we'd like to see do shows, and to be able to help them try and support some community of artists is very special. It's really great. We've got Arts Council funding for the last couple of years, as well as the separate fundraising we do. Lindsey is amazing. She does editions of her own work that's donated, and the artists that we work with is one thing that we do ask in return is editions from them, or donations from them, to help the next sort of wave of artists receive basically like a fee or a bursary for the shows that they do. So yeah, it's been a lot of work, and it was more work than we kind of maybe thought it would be or intended it to be. But yeah, it's been a great adventure,
Yeah, in terms of looking from afar, you've done something really special. I think the reception from the existing Margate community seems to be extremely positive. So you're obviously doing something very good. I mean, like, you're doing something right. You're doing it for the right reasons as well, which I think a lot of younger artists. Sorry, go on.
What's nice is, like, opposite to London, where there is infinite choice about what to see, and what you could possibly do in a weekend or whatever. I'd say Margate's become a good art destination. There's just enough things to do in a day. There's galleries like Carl Friedman and the Turner Contemporary, and then a handful of more independent galleries. So yeah, if you're coming down to Margate, you tend to kind of see the shows. So like, footfall is decent, all in all. And it's a nice town to visit anyway. So we get you get a captive audience. And that's what I mean, for people coming down. And it's growing, because since we've opened up, there are other smaller galleries, especially in the Cliftonville side of town, So yeah, and it does feel like a community. It's really it's quite supportive. It's quite warm. And I guess that kind of thing. That's a sort of time in my life. I'm kind of quite happy to embrace that. Yeah, it's just sort of an alternative, because I mean, the art world in London isn't warm. It's great, but people are. It's so hard. It's so competitive that people don't really have the space to be as supportive to each other as they would be in other situations.
When you talk about sort of fame, and when you talk about sort of like the way that fame is presented, it's sort of presented in this perfect way. There is this thing with comedians that they say, like, you kind of have to be a bit messed up, or like, which one of your parents was not nice to you that made you be a comedian. This kind of this running joke with comedians, and sort of more stuff that's happened. I think the recent things with Russell Brand made me think about whether fame and the people that get to that higher echelon of fame are really broken in a similar way that the comedians are. Like presenting yourself as being completely perfect all the time must be extremely difficult. And then also this pressure to have yourself all worked out, and then in the background you've got drug addiction, or in the background you've got something really traumatic that you're really struggling to deal with, but you've got to turn up and smile. I'm interested in terms of like what your thoughts are of people that are like hungry for fame.
I know what you're saying, because I do think the same thing, that I think to be really famous must be so psychologically disorientating. When when you go in a room and everyone knows who you are, well, you're always going to be the story in that person's day. Like, oh my god, I met so and so. Like, what the hell does that feel like? And I do think of, particularly like in terms of reality TV, to want that and to really kind of desire it, you must be slightly disturbed or unstable somehow, or imbalanced. I think about it with politics a lot. That desire to kind of want to be at that top level of politics is pretty brutal. I mean, no one would want to be. Most normal people wouldn't want to be Rishi Sunak, in the sense of you're just getting just on a level of everyone taking the piss out of you all the time. Just what the level of thick skin that you'd have to have is quite. It's quite extreme, and that people say, it's the people who rise to the top that you need to be worried about, because of that, the power and the fame that comes with power, the power that comes with fame, sorry, is so sort of inextricably linked, in terms of politics, and that we shouldn't really, we should always be suspicious of people who want that job. But we need people, we need political leaders. So what do you do? I don't know. But I do think, how does anyone survive that level of scrutiny and intense attention? But yeah, and then I did do a film about kind of the dark side of fame, I suppose. It was basically about the old idea of separating art from the artist. And so it was called You Know Nothing of My Work, which comes from a Woody Allen film. And Woody Allen was a kind of a rolling subject or motif in the film, partly because I suppose he's been an influence and an inspiration to me as an artist, or as a figure. I've always been a big fan of his. In the past, are we still allowed to like the work of people who are horrible, or bad people? And that's something that's, it's been so prescient over the last, nearly 10 years, I suppose. It's becoming a sort of defining issue of our time, I suppose. The idea, it's so linked to the idea of cancel culture.
It's extremely complicated, and it doesn't seem to have a set, like a set of rules, like a consistent set of rules, because it sort of works for one person and it doesn't for another. You spoke about this on your interview, where you were talking about someone like Michael Jackson. You'll still hear their music. You're not going to hear R. Kelly, but the surrounding stories that have emerged are quite sort of on the same page anyway. The film that you're referring to speaks about certain figures from art, certain Pablo Picasso, for example. Are we allowed to kind of cancel him? I don't think it's possible to cancel Pablo Picasso.
Well, I think when the whole Michael Jackson thing came out, when Finding Neverland was released, you thought, well, these aren't peripheral figures. You know, he was the most famous man on the planet for me growing up in our generation. And so you can't kind of erase those legacies. I suppose it's that discomfort that I guess you referred to earlier, like this kind of being drawn to something that's really inconvenient. Some things you can brush under the carpet because it just like, we don't want to think about you and your horrible things you've done. I suppose the example that I used in the film was that of Lost Prophets, and that's how the kind of the story of like how I ended up kind of with this idea to make a film about this did start with me being in a charity shop, and then I would find old secondhand Lost Prophets CDs, and this sort of weird sort of sense of panic, like, shit, do I say something to the shopkeeper, because they're just because it was so horrible, but they were of a certain size that could be
moved away,
sort of erased. They hadn't made a seismic shift in the cultural landscape to that extent, but Michael Jackson, shit, it's there everywhere. And then the idea in the film is just, the more I look, the more I see the kind of influence of these particular people, or the imprint that they've made in the world. And so one way or another, we have to kind of live with it, or work out how we're going to live with it, or how we're going to move forward. And that's what I'm interested in, because it's not realistic to kind of erase Pablo Picasso. It just isn't.
Celebrating his genius should come with the conversation of the bad things, the treatment of women and stuff. So I think it's that thing of like, we don't like nuance. We don't have time for it. 15-second TikTok videos are not long enough to get into nuance. You need to be pretty brash with your opinion, and hopefully it divides enough people to get them to comment.
Yeah, and that's what's weird and very modern. This lack of nuance, this lack of time or space to sort of hold kind of complicated thoughts in your head, or slightly kind of contradictory thoughts. So it's an odd thing that we're sort of choosing to do out of some sort of public morality fear. And so we know we're doing this, but we've got to kind of play along in a way. But yeah, I suppose it's the job of artists to really kind of unpick things and actually find, be uncomfortable.
I think it's an easy decision to throw things away. It's a necessary decision to throw things away sometimes, but it's sort of an easier decision. And a lot of the time, I think, comes from a place of sort of projecting to the world, having everything worked out and being able to make a decision. There's a lot of sort of sometimes virtue signaling going on. In the case of the recent Russell Brand documentary, the reaction I had that I tried to pay attention to was my feeling of sort of knowing something was up and knowing that there was something not quite right and tuning out. I mean, not quite right. It's quite obvious in recent times, but when he had the Paxman interview, I was very taken by his passion, what seemed to be very much the fight of the everyday man. And I was very hooked by his sort of charisma and the way he was able to sort of disarm people in interviews. Looking back on some of those interviews, it was sort of wholly inappropriate at times, but he's just, and he was very good at it, or is very good at sort of saying, I'm this, I'm like this, but also I'm just a guy from Essex. I'm just a guy from Essex. And it's like, you're not really that just a guy from Essex anymore. You are someone else, and you do have a lot of responsibility, and you have to take responsibility on how your words and things affect people. You can't just be like, pay attention to it sometimes and then sometimes not. But yeah, personally, I just felt very like, physically kind of angry. And I guess there was a lot of projection in that because, I trusted him. I was taken in by you in the way that a lot of people would have been and still are. And I just feel like, consider, like, again, another hero, another kind of, hero's a big word, but like, I read Basquiat's, who sort of was a big art hero of mine, and I read his girlfriend at the time's memoirs, and he was really horrible. He was like really consistently horrible and selfish, and again, that thing of hunger for fame and the type of person that is, and it's something that from watching your work and each film kind of really talks about a different thing. There are links, but just it gets me thinking. I was, after watching your work, was just really thinking about it. This is probably the biggest compliment you can have as an artist, but I was thinking about it all the next day. I watched like a few of them, and then the next day I watched the one where you talk about your relationship to alcohol, which I found really fascinating. Obviously, British culture is so revolved around it. But personally, I've had like to really question, blackouts, that feeling of fear and anxiousness because you can't remember something. Very normalized, very, very normalized in especially sort of when you're in your 20s and 30s in living in England and London. But yeah, I like the way that your work really pushes people to think about their own personal relationships, and the way that you do this a lot, sorry to waffle on, is by being so vulnerable, being so honest about your own relationship to this thing that fascinates you or that you're sort of self-reflecting on. There's a lot of bravery in that, and then you give the bravery to the viewer of like, oh, maybe I should be brave enough to tackle that really uncomfortable thing, that I should think about that relationship that I've got with alcohol. I should think about why I'm not comfortable until I have 2 drinks, because that is not really normal. It's not kind of normal, but it is normalized. But I shouldn't need alcohol to feel like I can talk to somebody I don't know at a networking event. But it certainly does. It certainly helps.
Yeah, well, that's part of Lindsey Mendick's show. That's on up in Edinburgh at the moment, Shit-Faced. And so we work together on that film project. But yeah, we do share, because we talk about work, and we're both very much in our work. So we'd make sort of very different work ostensibly, but I think that's how we kind of bonded in that way, that we both want to provoke conversations, I suppose. We want anyone to be able to engage with our work. We're not into kind of like massive understatement. We want real content, and we want people to feel that and recognize what we're trying to say. And yeah, Lindsey's show was brilliant because it does talk about what's very apparent in so many people's lives. I think the reaction to it was amazing. That so it's essentially still kind of taboo, our general relationship to alcohol, and it's often not something that is a subject in an art exhibition. Yeah, we both kind of have that odd compulsion to be very honest, or kind of just it's just how we kind of process. We both obsess about things and then put ourselves very much as that conduit of trying to say something, trying to sort of make sense of it
and discover the truth by not judging yourself and putting it on the line. you know?
I mean, like this film I'm making at the moment, I'm kind of up against it in terms of getting it finished, but I don't know what it's about, and I'm kind of saying that in the film, like, why am I making a film about my family, about a bunch of stuff that happened? And it's hard. It's a bit like a lot of writers kind of have that, like writing a memoir or something. I feel, I was very nervous about doing it because of involving my family or talking about whether it's completely my place to be able to talk about other people in the family who might not want that being talked about. But yeah, at the same time, I feel like I've kind of got to do this at this time in my life now. It's been building and stuff. The more honest you are, the more it relates to people, the more it connects to other people, or the more personal you are. And yeah, that's what most art is about, surely, about communication.
Yeah. Is it uncomfortable to be so vulnerable?
Yeah. The last show I did, which was called We Put the Unction into Erectile Dysfunction, got quite personal in a way I'm sure you can't imagine. But I really, I never felt so panicked on the day of the opening. I thought, why the hell
What have I done?
would I do this? Why would I be putting this out into the world? Like,
yeah,
absolute sense of terror and regret. But it's part of an ongoing thing of like whatever it is I'm doing as an artist. I guess it's all kind of connected. And one project leads to another, and hopefully makes sense as a whole.
Yeah, definitely does as a body of work. I think with that particular exhibition and the film that was kind of at the centerpiece of that, it felt like it wasn't just about erectile dysfunction. It was about masculinity and the pressures of, I mean, it's quite obviously about the pressures that society puts on men. There's also like then a comedic aspect to it, and then also sort of horror aspect to it, and this kind of building heartbeat of a sort of backing soundtrack, and this rhyming song, I guess, that you've kind of written and performed. I found it compelling. Like I that was one of the films where I just thought about it the next day, and the visuals are very sort of striking and kind of embedded in my head. And you take the costume from, it's a mint advert, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a Trebor Soft Mints. There's a character called Mr. Soft.
For anyone that hasn't seen, it's like a pillowy man. And this costume of a pillowy man. It's an amazing work. I encourage everyone to. I think it's like if they want an introduction to your work, just jump straight into that, and they're gonna. I feel want to watch everything you've made. It's a really really amazing work. So the work that you're working on at the moment, Badly Drawn Boys, is for a show I think that you've got coming up. Do you have a date set in mind for all of that?
It will be at Quench in Margate, and it will open on the 6th of October. And it's a duo show. It's a collaboration between me and Finbar Ward, who we're kind of working separately, but in a unified way, or a kind of exchanging kind of way. And yeah, the show as a whole is, we think it's going to be called Interiority Complex. The starting point for him was about kind of homes and den building and kind of how that kind of relates to the family. So we both kind of had this starting point of the family as a sort of motif. Yeah, his work is more sculptural. And yeah, check it out. Come to Margate.
Yeah, I really want to. But it's been on my list for a long time. Just having children is just they weren't at the age where you could go to the beach and not be in a panic. I actually went to Folkestone for the first time, to the beach with them last summer, not this summer gone, but the last summer. And it was the first time where I lost sight of my child for, like more than a minute, me and my partner. We spoke, and then he was here, and then I spoke to her probably for about 15 seconds. And I looked around and he wasn't there. And I said, where is he? Where is he? And it was just that bit from like Baywatch where everything gets blurry and everyone's just like really loud and I was just like, oh my gosh. And he was wearing like really like hard to notice, like navy shorts or something, like, and then you look around and like everyone's wearing navy. It was horrible, really horrible. And we just ran towards the sea. Like that was where he would definitely go. And then, found him a few meters away, but it was really busy. And I don't know.
Oh dear.
I need to put kids on leashes. Am I right? But no,
cages, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, I was so scared. So yeah, now he's got like, even though we haven't been back to the beach since, he's got 2 pairs of neon orange and neon green shorts for the next time we do go. Yeah, he's really big into neon. I don't know why he's 18 and he's painting. I don't know why. I just love these neon colors. I'm not sure if I like explained your work very well. I felt like you did. To somebody that hasn't seen it.
It's always awkward to describe your work as funny, because it's sort of like, oh, it's funny, are you?
Yeah. Tell us a joke. Yeah. No, it is really funny. I found myself laughing. It's that kind of laugh where you're laughing, you laugh, and then you laugh more because it's so absurd. And then you can't stop laughing because you're like laughing at the fact that you're laughing at something that you're really not sure whether you should be laughing at or not. The use of music in your work, you've spoken about it, and you spoke about Jeffrey Lewis, an artist that we're both very, very fond of. And you introduced me to Jeffrey Lewis.
Yeah, he's a big influence on me, and this kind of interest in kind of wordplay and rhyming couplets and things that I've sort of grown into. I think a lot of it's come from my interest in his work and kind of trying to kind of emulate that sort of profound, funny, sad thing that he often does so brilliantly. And it all started with like the song called the Chelsea Hotel Oral Sex Song, which is very similar to what I do, in the sense of like a weird observation that ends up being like a 9-minute song about an opportunity to get off with someone that never really happened. He kind of like positions himself as a sort of hapless dork kind of thing a lot of the time. Like I kind of like, he's quite like, he plays with a sort of beta man persona a little bit.
Yeah.
Like it's one of the few people to really explore that kind of concept of the sort of anti-alpha male. I'm interested in. I tried to collaborate with him on the You Know Nothing of My Work. I tried to reach out and see if there was a way to work, and it nearly happened, but it was just too complicated to try and grab him whilst he was basically on a whistle-stop tour of the UK. It just wasn't practical.
That would be amazing. I'd love to see that.
His influence is there, very, very apparent in the film. And yeah, anyone who doesn't know his work, check him out. But yeah, the times that we've bumped into each other over the years is usually at a Jeffrey Lewis gig.
Yeah,
which is interesting. So yeah, we kind of have that in common. The idea of like the beta male, I think I had this idea that it sort of starts with Woody Allen, and kind of this idea that there's a lineage between him and Woody Allen and maybe myself, and the idea of we could sort of be in conversation with each other talking about Woody Allen kind of thing, about how we deal with his artistic legacy. That was the idea around that. But yeah, music I've always been obsessed with, and one way or another, it's over the years, it became more and more a stronger and stronger feature of the work until now. I'm kind of I created a musical,
Yes.
For example, or just working with musicians and things now, which is great. Kind of self-indulgent, sure, but it's fun.
Yeah, I've enjoyed diving into your work. I've seen maybe 5 films, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the new work. But yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Dan.
You're welcome. Yeah, no, I really appreciate you coming on. And if anybody wanted to check your work out, what would be the best way of them seeing some work? Is it to go through your social media or website?
Social media, yeah, Guy J. Oliver on Instagram, or guyoliver.co.uk is my website.
Thank you very much, Guy, for taking the time. I hope to catch up with you soon.
Thank you for having me, Dan. Take care.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to follow our guests on whichever social media platform you enjoy using most. Links are in the usual places. Links to all my social media accounts can also be found at the bottom of every single page over on my website at danielcrossan.com. The best way to support this podcast is to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Please leave a review and even consider sharing the podcast with a friend. Special thanks goes to Low Fox for producing the music for the podcast. Thank you very much again for listening. See you next time. Take care.